Mr. President, I rise today to recognize a former member of this body and my longtime friend and mentor, Senator Jim Abdnor of South Dakota. Senator Abdnor passed away last Wednesday, May 16, 2012, in South Dakota in the company of friends and family. We are both products of the dusty shortgrass country just west of the Missouri River on the plains of central South Dakota. Jim was a product of the active and civically minded political culture of Lyman County, and I was from next door, Jones County. Despite these counties' sports rivalries over the years, Jim took me under his wing and introduced me to the American political process. If not for Jim Abdnor, I would not be standing here today. After a basketball game when I was a freshman in high school, Jim struck up a conversation with me that would change the course of my life. I went to work for Jim as a legislative assistant when he was a senator, and later at the Small Business Administration. When I first ran for office, Jim's guidance and support were invaluable to me. This past weekend, hundreds of South Dakotans came out to honor Jim Abdnor and remember his great love for them and for his state. His funeral was held in a Lutheran church in the shadow of the state capitol in Pierre, where Jim first served in statewide office as lieutenant governor. Jim was buried just outside of his small hometown of Kennebec, near where his immigrant father first homesteaded. Mr. President, Jim leaves us with many legacies, and I want to mention a few of them here today. First and foremost, Jim's was an American story. It started as the tale of an immigrant who boarded a ship for the United States, not even knowing the English language, but knowing he was heading for the land of opportunity. That immigrant, Jim's father, Sam Abdnor, wanted to escape the growing authoritarianism of his native Lebanon for American freedom. Jim's story is also a frontier story. His father, Sam, settled in Lyman County, South Dakota. Sam Abdnor became a homesteader and planted corn and wheat. He also peddled his wares to the other farmers in the area, and when Kennebec was organized as a town, Sam was one of the first people to establish a business on Main Street. Jim grew up learning how to balance the books in a small-town store and knowing how to work the family farm. He learned financial responsibility and hard work and how one can climb the ladder of success in America. Jim's story is also a story of the land and of farming. Some of us who knew Jim through politics may forget that before he was elected to Congress, Jim had owned and run the family farm for 3 decades. Jim was very proud of the fact that he was good at representing South Dakota agriculture because he was an active farmer who did the planting and hauled his grain to the elevator in the fall. When he was in Congress, South Dakota was ranked as the most agricultural state in the nation, and Jim was the first farmer elected to Congress from South Dakota. Jim was proud of that correlation, and he never forgot his farming roots. During the 1970s, when people were organizing sit-ins and teach-ins and other types of protests, Jim helped organize a beef-in. He brought 100 West River ranchers to Washington, D.C. to talk about farm issues. They set up pens of cattle on the Washington Mall and met with agricultural officials. Jim didn't rest until these ranchers had their voices heard. Jim's story is also about water. We all live comfortably now with running water and hot showers, but that's not how Jim grew up. He grew up on his family's windy, dryland farm in Lyman County. He lived through the droughts of the 1930s. He understood the importance of water. He never stopped working on the issues of water access, including being a champion of the Webb Water Project in Walworth, Edmonds, and Brown counties in north-central South Dakota that began in 1983. The question of water was never far from Jim's mind, and I think it had something to do with his heritage. That's certainly true of his Lyman County roots, which is where the humid Midwest begins to turn into the arid high plains, but also of his roots in Lebanon, where water is also scarce. His family's home village of Ain Arab was founded because it was a watering hole. Ain Arab literally means spring or well. More specifically, it means spring of the Arab. When they had enough water in Ain Arab, they would grow wheat, just like the Abdnors would do out in Lyman County, South Dakota. Jim's is also a story about organizing. As soon as he came home from college, he started organizing Republicans in Lyman County and became head of the Lyman County Young Republicans. He helped organize and found the Elks Lodge in Pierre in 1953. He joined every organization he could, and he brought as many people into community affairs and politics and civic organizations as he could as well. Jim also pushed other people to organize. He liked to tell the story of the people in Faith, South Dakota, who wanted a new grandstand for their rodeo grounds. They took one look at the federal regulations involved with some grant program and promptly did everything themselves, raising all the money that they needed from local sources and fundraisers, and did it at 10% of the cost. They put in 4,000 hours of their own time and made it happen themselves, and Jim appreciated that. He liked communities working together to solve their own problems. During the 1970s, when tensions in the Middle East worsened, Jim called for his fellow Arab Americans to become more involved in the political process. He opposed what he saw as their tendency toward isolation and self-segregation. He said his ethnic compatriots should get out and mix. They should become more involved, he said, become part of the community. Jim never stopped believing in the importance of being involved and working with others to make life better. This is why Jim had so many friends. He never stopped working to meet people and bring them together around issues and simply to socialize. A friend of mine says that he doesn't think anyone in the state of South Dakota has ever attended more weddings, graduations, ceremonial dinners, or basketball, baseball, and football games than Jim Abdnor. As someone from the wide-open plains who wanted groups of people to come together to solve problems on their own, Jim was always resisting federal encroachment on local control. As the son of a small businessman, Jim was sensitive to the growing encroachment of federal regulations and how much this encroachment cost small businesses. For many years, Jim was especially incensed about OSHA mandating rules for small stores on South Dakota main streets. In the 1970s, Jim also had a big fight with OSHA because it was trying to mandate that South Dakota wheat farmers maintain porta potties in fields, which a practicing wheat farmer from Lyman County, South Dakota, knew was the definition of absurd. As a small businessman and farmer, Jim was always worried about the bottom line, and he constantly tried to apply these concerns in the area of the federal budget. Jim was sounding the alarm bell back in the 1970s when the federal government spent less than $400 billion a year, which today seems laughably small given our current state of affairs. Back then, he was attacking deficits of $70 billion. He was also adamantly opposed to the federal government bailing out New York City in the 1970s because he said it would set a bad precedent. He attacked a federal debt limit ceiling of $500 billion as being highly irresponsible. He criticized the fact that each American owed $2,000 because of the federal government's debt. Jim liked to quote the editor of the Freeman Courier, who asked, and I quote, "How can it be that a government which is unable to balance its own budget and lives far beyond its means has the authority to tell a businessman how to run his business," end quote. Jim wasn't afraid to make hard votes to fix our problems, votes that probably cost him his Senate seat. But Jim Abdnor had the moral courage to make tough decisions. Mr. President, Jim Abdnor leaves us with a critical reminder. He embodied the American dream. He was the son of a poor Lebanese peddler who built a successful business and raised a great family, including a son who ascended the heights of American politics and became a United States Senator. Jim Abdnor shows how hard work and diligence can pay off. Mr. President, on this occasion of remembrance and during this time of honoring my good friend Jim Abdnor, I hope we can remember our solemn duty to protect the American dream that the Abdnor family represented. In closing, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that my remarks and the Senate resolution expressing profound sorrow and deep regret regarding the death of Senator Jim Abdnor be included together as part of the congressional record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I yield the floor.